All right, it's starting up. All right, we are live on YouTube. It is the October 12th, 2021 meeting of the Loaders team. And the only item on the agenda today is Antoine's PR about import assertions, specifically for JSON, but potentially for all sorts of things. So Antoine, do you want to, I hand it off to you. And I think everyone on the team knows what this PR is. So maybe, I guess, what are the questions that would be useful to resolve while we have everyone together?
So let's see. So we have of course a little discussion maybe to have on how we can implement the cache. So either we find a way around having to have the import assertion part of the cache key, or how, if we have to make it part of the cache key, how do we do it? I think that's first big technical discussion we need to have. And other than that, what would be the API with regard to loaders? Like, would loaders have access to import assertions, and if so, which loader hooks, and how should they do it? So we started. I've opened an issue to discuss that. So it's under loaders repo. What's the number again?
Oh, do you want to share the link to that?
Yeah. So it's issue 39 on Node.js/loaders repo. And Geoffrey has started working on an implementation of one of the possible implementations. So I think that's that would be, no, it's not on the table. So I need to update the table with Geoffrey's implementation.
Well, how to handle it within loader hooks is very much, I'm not sure what makes the most sense. So we should talk about that while we have Jacob and everyone. But I think, like, maybe in terms of what's the best use of Miles's time while he's here, I think, so I pushed some code last night. I didn't quite finish everything I wanted to do, but I wanted to just push what I had up before this meeting. I basically, like, on that, here, I can put the link on that PR. The last time I spoke to Antoine, I had like put a comment summarizing where, yeah, that one. So if you look at my last like meaningful comment on there, not like replying to Targos, but the last comment that wasn't in a reply to a PR review, I put like a list of 4 to-do items, and I've been working on just more. Antoine was gracious enough to let me just commit right to the same branch. So I've been working on adding additional commits so that he could see what I've done versus what he did, to try to implement those 4 things. And I'm very close to finishing all 4. The last bit is the thing that he was talking about of, like, do we have this as part of the cache key? And if not, well, if so, how do we handle that? If not, how do we handle that? Basically, I wanted to try to keep it, if possible, not as part of the cache key. And I think I know, this morning, I think I came up with a way to do that, actually, to try to implement it and see if I'm right. But basically that would preserve kind of the way loaders work, where it all kind of resolves around the resolved URL. Like, the resolve hook has to give a URL. That's the hinge point to the load hook, which then returns the source. If we have the assertions as part of the cache key, I would think that that then means that resolve needs to return both, and then load needs to take both and treat that as a combined key to return something. And that just feels like a lot of complexity, especially if we want the loaders to potentially mess with the assertions. Like if we want to write a loader that ignores the assertions or something like that, then how does that gel with the assertion is part of the key? You know what I mean? So that's why I was going to try to keep it out, and maybe I'll fail, but I think it's doable. So I guess the question is, let's assume it's possible to do it either way. Do we want the assertion to be part of the key for some reason? And if so, why would that be?
So my reasoning on that is, so the import assertion for the type needs the format which is written by the load hook. So when the resolve hook returns a URL, we don't know yet if it's going to be the correct format for the given assertion. So we are between the resolve and the load hook. There's uncertainty, and that's why on my PR I've made it part of the cache key basically. And
one thing that may be relevant is the resolve hook can return a format hint. So you could potentially leverage that, but it's just a hint, not an end-all be-all. So that may not be authoritative enough.
Node default resolve doesn't, I don't think, return a format. So
right, we could
update
the
default, like the overwhelmingly common case where there's no user loaders involved. We don't know the format until after load completes.
Right, we could update it to that. I think. Oh no, you couldn't, because it needs to have, for instance, if you're loading it over HTTPS, you would need to have the actual result of the thing to know, right? Yeah. Okay.
I think that's why we put it there in the first place.
So I guess if we step back from the cache key itself and just think about like loaders and the information they're given. Let's say I'm an APM and I'm writing a custom loader to completely override Node's loader altogether. It seems to me, Jeff, that like knowing the values of what's in the assertions, independent of whether or not it's served as part of the cache key, will likely be necessary. It's something people may want to configure if they want to write. I have mixed feelings about this, but let's say people want to write their own custom assertions that they can extend or use. I know, for example, I can't remember if it was Babel or React, but like a couple different folks were definitely interested when we were first kind of speccing it, that like for some of these platforms, maybe even TypeScript, that like extend the language and then run through a transpiler or something like that, that they may want to write like custom assertions that are part of their own platform. And so independent of the implementation, where it sounds like cache key is an implementation concern, I do think that loaders will likely need to be aware of, are there assertions and what the assertions are as part of like the internals of the loader, if we want to be able to support people writing custom assertions as extensions that don't need to be like pre-processed or transpiled in order to work.
Yeah, that's already in the PR. I think we're in agreement on that. That
Okay.
it's just an additional. Right now, it's just an additional thing on the context along with conditions. So, and it's currently getting passed into both resolve and load, because depending on like where you're getting the stuff from, you might know in one or the other, like what to do based on the assertion. As I was working on this, it did occur to me that like, so the basically like if it's part of the cache key, that's really like a technical way of saying, do we want separate module cache entries for say the same specifier but with different assertions? Either it has an assertion or it doesn't, or there's two import statements. One says, assert type JSON, the other says assert type, I don't know, CSS or whatever. More likely it would just be like one has an assertion and one doesn't. But if there are both and they both resolve successfully, like it's not going to throw an error on one of them, and that currently that would only happen if you write a custom loader that like it just ignores the validation. What should the intended behavior be? Like, should there be two separate records in the module cache, and then we have like another version of the dual package hazard? Or should there, if there's only one key that ignores the assertion, then it's kind of a race condition of like which one happened to get put into the module cache first, and then it's like it's on the loader author who ignored the validation to like be aware of that possibility.
From what I understand from the spec, a same specifier has to return the same module. Now, maybe we want our users to be able to write loaders that do not respect the spec, but wanted to point it out.
Oh, so we can't have two records, in other words, for the same specifier?
Yeah, if we import one specifier and import it later again, it should be the same object module.
Even if the second import statement has a different assertion?
Yes, that's what I understand from the spec. Maybe Miles.
I would have to double check on the exact language in the spec, because that's one of the things that like were changed back and forth, and we could bring in like for clarity. I was more involved in the spec in the early stages when we were just trying to get like consensus on we'll even do this, and then when it got more into like the internals, other people were writing the spec language. But I could imagine, I believe that like we don't need to throw on unknown assertions. So I think that like if I recall correctly, if there's an assertion that is unrecognized, it can be ignored because we didn't want to make like an infinite list of all possible assertions. I also believe at least,
I think it must be ignored actually. If so, to be forward compatible, if we have an import asset, like assert instead of type, we could have I don't know, something else.
Yeah,
that would be ignored.
And I also believe, but I could be wrong on this, that in general, platforms could support additional assertions. And those aren't necessarily going to be consistent between platforms. There was concerns initially when we talked about stuff like this for things like resource integrity. So TC39, myself in particular, don't believe that import assertions are where resource integrity should be checked. A, because then that makes cycles impossible. But B, it's like very, very thrashy, because the second you actually change like one import assertion SHA, then it virally goes up the whole tree, and you need to like kind of like stamp that. So maybe it could be done by tooling just before shipping something out, but like it's very footnoty to put it lightly. But I could see a world where like, yes, we may say for our platform that the JSON assertion is mandatory, but there may also be an additional assertion that could be put there that verifies the type of JSON or something like that, that like it has certain qualities to it that could be ignored in those cases, but a tool may pick up on you and utilize it for something else. But if that other assertion is arguably optional and ignored, if it's written in one place and not the other place, I don't believe that it's reasonable to say that we have two instances of the same thing, because people are using a specifier to refer to an instance of something that does mean something as well in the platform as far as singletons are concerned. And I'm not sure that an optional additional assertion should then in turn mean like, I want an instance of this thing versus like at this import site, there's additional information I'd like to check about it. Like, I don't know. I feel like we could argue about that. I also think that it's possible that if we are having trouble interpreting the spec on this, if we feel like something is ambiguous, if we feel like as a platform it would be better for us to have something be explicit here, there's no reason why we can't go to TC39 with adjusted language to the spec to try to make this more explicit, or to ask for a recommendation. We could also ask for non-normative text, so that would mean like not spec text, but just like kind of like an editorialized recommendation that specifies this. I think it would be interesting also to see like, how does Chrome implement this behavior versus how does Dino implement this behavior? Because there's also something to be said about like kind of consistency across platforms for this one as well, which I guess is maybe hard to even test if they don't all like support these different forms. And the last bit of tangential thing I'll say is like, this is arguably a good reason to enforce, for now at least, that JSON must have the assertion, because then it does kind of like remove these edge cases and our need to like kind of carve out this space. I'm not saying that's the most compelling reason not to do it. It's just like, throw it on the file.
When
I think, yeah, there's still a race condition possible, even if we remove the possibility of importing JSON without an insertion. A user could still do it. So if we have a import,
still do it
JSON
via
without
a user loader, you mean?
No, like user code, they import JSON without an assertion and import it with an assertion concurrently. So what happens? Because until the load hook resolved, we don't know what format it's going to be.
Where in the loader phase? Go for it, Jake.
I was going to say, if you have multiple assertions, is it possible for them to both be okay? Or wouldn't it be mutually exclusive? Like only one of them can be accurate if it's present. So the only real cases are an assertion that passes and the absence of an assertion, which might resolve to be the same thing. It's like if I say this is JSON and then I say this is TypeScript, only one of those things can be true.
True, but we don't know which one it's going to be. So Geoffrey pasted the test case.
This is the one test that's currently failing on my branch, and it has to do with this question. So I ran the equivalent of this in a browser in Chrome. I ran it using JSON. So the whether it's like as in the first one should pass and the second one should throw, because it actually is JSON, versus this is like JavaScript, so it's the inverse. But the same thing. And I was like, so I was just like, well, what do browsers do for this? Do they both pass, both throw? Does it matter which one comes first? Like if one resolves before the other, does that make a difference? Like if say it resolves, like say I put the second import in a set timeout, so I know it happens after the first one has resolved. If the first one resolved successfully with the assertion and the second one came later and it didn't have the assertion, does it also resolve successfully because that key is already in the module cache? And basically, browsers basically behave as if there's no cache. I mean, I'm sure they must have a cache, but from all the tests that I've run, like the one without the assertion for JSON always throws, no matter what order it's in. If it's concurrent, if it's later, if it's first, it just always throws. So the browsers somehow like keep it straight, and I feel like we should mimic that behavior, because that just feels like what would be expected as a user. You know what I mean?
But how would you do it if assertion type is not part of the cache key?
Because you can, I think, only actually have one entry because of what I mentioned before, that like if it's TypeScript and it's JSON, only one of those things can be true. And then the absence of something is like, I didn't give you anything, so like do as you do. So I would kind of expect it to be like, if I specify an assertion of JSON, then that gets shoved in as it does, and then I request it again, and I'm lazy and I don't put the assertion, and I just get that thing. Or if we decide that's not allowed, then I don't.
Yeah, but the thing is, if the first import fixture/empty.js resolves, so it's now part of the cache. This URL is linking to the module job, but it's not going to check its assertion until the load hooks resolves. So when the second one comes, it could reject automatically because it doesn't have an assertion and the first one had, but it doesn't know if the first one is going to reject or not. So
I think we should not really like support that. That's kind of like a, if you get lucky. And I think programming should not be if you get lucky.
Race conditions. Yeah, so this is what I was getting at. Regardless of how we handle this, that's the problem I'm trying to figure out. I think I have an idea, but I don't want to get into that here because I don't think that my idea may very well not work. I don't need your feedback on it. If it doesn't work, then I find another solution. But what this is making me think though is that I think we just don't want race conditions. Like we don't want the possibility of race conditions, like period, because then we start to get all sorts of complexity and code just doesn't run reliably. Like as you're developing one app, if you move files around, then, or move the order of the import statements around, it behaves differently. There's definitely no guarantee that it behaves the same way on a different platform, like browsers or Deno. So the thing is, I'm thinking is like, if we agree that we want to avoid race conditions where the order in which they're resolved influences whether or not successive ones get resolved, then I think then the assertions can never be optional. Like it has to always be present for JSON and it can never be present for JavaScript, and that just can't change, and that might as well be part of the spec. Otherwise, if it becomes optional, like if we allow, import assert type module as an optional assertion for JavaScript in the future, then all of a sudden this race condition thing applies for regular JavaScript, and there's no easy way to solve that. Like we could have them be separate entries in the cache, but then that violates the other spec where specifier needs to return the thing.
Actually, I think Jeff, that's a great thing to build off of there, and I'm gonna have to drop in a moment. Apologies, but let's say we as a platform wanted to support type module as an import assertion, which in theory is something that we could do that could allow us to have more flexibility around the JS and JS stuff. If we should, is a whole other thing. I'm
Plenty of
not
other
actually
examples,
proposing this.
but yeah, sure.
But if we did that, I would argue that type module would be not an enforced assertion. It would be an optional assertion. And I would not, if I import Lodash and I assert that it's whatever it is, I would not want two instances of it. I would either want like one instance between all those import sites, or if it's not actually returning the type that I've asked for, it throws. But my expectation would not be that when I import Lodash and then again import Lodash type module, that I get two completely different instances of it, which that in turn seems to push back against the cache key point, because if the type module is part of the cache key, then we would be getting like two different
Right.
entries.
It's literally the dual package hazard again.
Yeah. I'm open to being convinced of otherwise, but I that's just a shot in the dark there.
Yeah. I think
Also,
everyone
yeah.
agrees on that, by the way.
Yeah.
The other people that wanted the assertion to be optional also wanted the modules to be exactly the same. Whether or not the assertion is present, they wanted the same source module object to be returned.
I think then it makes sense for it to not be part of the cache key, and you just shove it in, and the assertion is basically like metadata. And then when you go to say, I don't know, pull it out and evaluate it or something, if it's there and it matches, good. If not, nay.
That's
If not,
exactly what I was
what
thinking of
exactly?
trying next.
I've got to drop, but I just wanted to drop one more thing in here just for you all to think about in the term of loaders. I did not realize that we actually specified a function called host get supported import assertions, which in turn, anything that's not part of that host supported list is ignored when going through the assertions. So if we did want to allow people to do like custom assertions at a loader level, we're going to need to figure out a way to allow people to extend this list that gets returned. And that may have to be like a runtime option or something more complex. But just,
Well, this would be like if we wanted V8 to handle it.
no, well, it's not just V8 does handle the assertion. So like we won't even get.
No, I mean, handle a custom, like type YAML or something like that. We would use this to tell V8 YAML is an acceptable type.
No,
we
it's, I think it's the list of assertion. So type is the only entry currently.
Yeah.
If you wanted another assertion which is not type.
This is like at a parser level. Like we would never even get from the machinery of V8 custom assertions unless they're part of this list. So if we want to support custom assertions, we need to expose something to allow users to extend this list. Not saying we should do that, but just to kind of like raise.
Well, that could be a future edition, I would think.
Yeah.
Then.
Okay, I really got to go. See y'all.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, the reason I wanted to bring this up, Antoine, was like, it feels, I mean, I want to get to the end of this PR and see what I was planning to do as the way to handle this was like, the code right now is like, in get module job, it's like, get the URL for this specifier parent URL assertions. With that URL, see if it's in the module cache. If so, return it. And it might be returning it, and what it's returning is an object with like 6 properties, and one of those is like module promise, which may still be pending. And until that promise resolves, we don't know if the assertion is valid or not. Like it may yet throw when that promise resolves, but yet we've already returned it, which is the problem. So what I was thinking was, there's already like 6 properties in that module job object, like whether, inspect break was set and other things. So I think one of those properties could just be the assertions object for when that module job was created. And then
so
it's
it's
like,
exactly the same as
it's the same as putting it in the key. I understand.
Yeah.
So like you'd be checking, is this URL in the module job? If so, pull it out. But wait, before you return it, does that assertion match this assertion?
Yeah.
If so, then return it. Otherwise, pretend you didn't find it in the, set job back to undefined, as if you hadn't found it in the module map, and then continue on.
But yeah, okay. That's risky though, I think, because
that sounds like silently failing.
Well, this is why I'm not sure it's going to work. So, so here's what I'm thinking is that if you set it to undefined again, as if you hadn't found it, then what's going to happen is this newer one is going to eventually replace the one that was already there.
Yeah.
And
it's going to be 2 different modules. So it's the dual package as that one all over again.
I mean, basically what you have to do in the end is make sure, this is how I'm not sure how to implement this. It's like, what I was thinking was like, somehow make sure that what eventually gets added to the module cache is the module job for this the module job for the URL that succeeds, because there can only be one in this version where assertions aren't optional. There can only be one that succeeds. So that should be the one that gets cached. And if there were 2 while they're both pending, the one that wins is the one that stays in the cache. The other one throws.
I feel like though the load hook could be a bit tricky and returns different format for the same URL. So if it returns first JSON and then
user loaders could fuck with this, like they could do whatever they want, And like, I think that this is a real possibility of user loaders creating all sorts of race conditions if they return a different format for the same URL multiple times, or a different, different source text, like it's on kind of loader authors to follow the spec if they want to, and they could get unexpected results if they don't. But oh, Bradley's here.
I think that kind of makes sense, because like the intention of this is to grant great power, and as the adage goes, great
Yeah,
power, great
let's leave aside the
responsibility.
user loader, like assume there are no user loaders for now. Like, are there any, just in regular Node, are there any issues with the approach that I'm suggesting, or like, I guess the other question, what would you do?
The issue I think is when we'll implement a loader to add support for assertionless JSON, it's gonna behave badly. Like there's gonna be 2 module record for the same JSON specifier, which is not great. But if we decide we don't care about it, I guess that's fine.
Well, I don't think there would be 2 records because
I mean,
if
they
they
stomp
both
each other.
succeeded. It would just be a race condition of whichever one succeeded first would be the one that's in the cache.
Yeah, but then the second one arrives, it doesn't have the same assertion, so it starts again, and it's a new.
But it would, if it had a different assertion, it would fail.
No, because the loader would let it do its thing.
Oh,
It's
you're talking about where like a loader,
Yeah, yeah,
like
in the
Well,
future
again,
world.
but leave aside.
this.
Imagine there are no user loaders though for the moment. Like,
Yeah, it's no. I guess that if there's no user loaders, I don't think it's a problem. It's
Okay.
just something to be aware of, that it's blocking future implementation of assertionless loaders.
To be clear, it's
Why
not
does it block?
blocking specifically assertionless loaders. It's blocking anything where they use the same URL and have 2 different routes through the module cache, whether you do it by a property on the module job or in the cache key. So it'll always race, and you always need to create a resolution kind for those 2. The resolution that we did in your PR, Antoine, was to coalesce eagerly before we do anything. And that works fine. But it's something you have to expose if we want for user loaders to be able to replicate the basic mechanics of web loaders, node loader, etc. We have to figure out what those cache operations are, and then define them out and how to get a user land loader to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the other alternatives I was thinking about were like, before you put it, don't put it into the module cache until it's resolved. That way, whether it got validated or not. So that way it's like, then you can trust that if something's in the module cache, it can be used. It's not potentially going to blow up on you.
So I
You
think
have to
that's
put it
what
in the module cache. You have to
Yeah,
put it in the
that's-
module cache eagerly.
And I think that's what the browsers are doing. They have a different cache entry depending if there's an assertion or not, which would be exactly like, I think it would be the same as what you just suggested.
But then you could end up with different.
Have 2, like if they're never, like, I think the thing is, like, if they're never optional, like right now assertions are never optional in browsers, right? Say we behave that way the same, then it doesn't matter if there are 2 entries for file.json, one with the assertion, one without, because the one without could never be used. You know what I mean? It would be put in the cache, and then it would just never get pulled out of the cache because the browser would have thrown before ever returning that value from the cache. You know what I mean?
Yes, but there's an important thing for browsers here is they only do one fetch. they don't delete it from the cache. It's still there. It just fails to import.
Yeah.
So,
So you're talking
if
about
you
like
So fetch
grabbing
is
it.
the load hook, right? For
it's roughly load hook, yeah.
So
Go ahead,
how
Jacob.
could they have done only one?
Because they
That's-
keep so you do one that fails. Let's say it's the one without the assertion, and this fails.
Uh-huh.
They do an
Fails
HTTP
where?
request.
Sorry,
The
fails where?
HTTP request is cached at that point, and it is actually saved in the module map in the browser spec.
Yes.
And then after all the loading occurs at the call site, at the consumer of the module job, the consumer checks the assertion. So the module map is untouched. The consumer checks and fails there. That's the only thing that happens. It doesn't delete it, doesn't do any of that. And so the next time it goes with the form with the assertion, the HTTP cache is already in place. They don't hit it. They only check the module map, which was finished at the end of essentially our load hook. It's been populated.
Isn't
It's
that
almost like they have a
what we were
separate
talking about
cache for
earlier?
like loaded source text versus.
They do, but they don't use it in this case. I'm just explaining that they don't use it. They only use the module map in the
Isn't this
second
what we were
lookup.
talking about earlier, where if you include it, like it just goes and fetches whatever the result specifier settles to. It goes and gets that. And then when you go to pull it out, if there is an assertion and it matches, good to go. And it sounds like that this is what it's doing. If there is an assertion, it's good to go. If there's not an assertion, fail. But the thing that's in the cache is still the same. It just either refused to give it to you or gave it to you.
Yes.
Oh,
And
okay, cool.
they do have the cache key thing for race conditions, like Antoine was mentioning, where you've got to figure out how to deal with concurrent requests. So, yeah.
But the resolve chain will have settled. So we, I think, would know ahead of time that we have this, say for specifier A, there are n number of assertions. So we would know all of those assertions ahead of time, right?
Not with dynamic import or having separate module graphs invoked by eval function, whatever. So not everything is static. Not everything's ahead of time.
Yeah,
And that's where the
what
races are.
If you look at the example in the chat, that's what makes this so hard, is that they're dynamic imports.
Yeah.
So the browsers do a two-tiered cache. That's one way to solve it. Coalescing is another way to solve the race condition. Browsers don't have a race condition because they never have a collision, because they only support one way of importing a given thing, even though their module cache is tiered. There's other things that you need to start supporting besides coalescing, like if somebody wants to write a web loader, which is a thing. You can watch Twitter, for example. People are asking about how to write a web compatible loader for Node all the time. Doing so means you don't want to coalesce.
I don't know what you're
you
talking
want to
about.
reject. So,
What?
but you don't want to reject during load. You want to reject after load because you want the entry to be the same.
Right. Before I forget, so let's say we've done all of the static stuff, and then we have something dynamic that comes later. We will still have the original cache and all the various information that we have collected. So the specifier will have settled to something, and we will have some kind of assertion list of stuff. And then the dynamic one comes later, and it, let's say, resolves to the same specifier URL. If there is a new
it could be it could be two dynamic imports and no static ones.
Well, sure, then we have, I think it's effectively the same. We'll have some list thing or we won't. And then as it gets in, like the dynamic imports are themselves, like that's the nature of the beast is race. So you stick your stuff in, it goes and fetches something. And if they settle to the same URL, you just get the same fetch. And I think that is, they would have resolved to the same thing anyway, like what they have gone out and grabbed. And then as the the two dynamic things add their assertions, they just get added to the list. And then they continue to, when it goes to pull it out, pass or fail. And then you either get it or you don't. No?
I mean, that's a very high level summary. The unclear part, I think, in your explanation was fail to get it or don't. Is that in the load hook or after the load hook?
So when you're, when you're retrieving it. So yeah, I guess after the load hook. So it's gone, it goes to the cache. The cache says, I have something, give me the password. And the assertion is effectively this password by Antoine. If your assertion matches, it agrees to give you the thing. And if it fails, then it says, sorry.
I mean,
Yeah, that's roughly what the spec was made to do. Yeah.
I mean, this is disappointing me because now it like, this makes me feel like now do we need another hook where validation happens after load, like resolve?
No, there's
load.
only like 4 operations you ever want to do in a conflict. So we just need to figure out the way we want to expose that. You definitely
Well,
don't need it.
I think that's what Jeffrey's suggesting is do this via a hook or some other means.
I mean, you need a new data point. I don't think you need a new life cycle, such as a hook.
Right. I mean, I was hoping to just make this another data point on the model job. Do you think that that's not going to work?
I mean, what's the data point you're trying to put on the module job? If it's
What
the
the
assertions, I
were.
don't think the assertions would work. If it's like the type, the format that it should be treated as, because as loaders, you can, implement your own way to generate, such as a JSON module. Yeah, that's probably fine. And then it would just be checked when you try to retrieve it.
Well, the whole check it when you try to retrieve it bit, that feels like another life cycle, like a separate validation hook.
I mean, not for type, at least. Type is like rigid in the spec. For other things, which we don't have good data points on what people want to do, we could add a hook eventually, but they're not allowed to do a variety of operations to do that validation.
I mean, just to be clear,
Well,
I'm hoping to avoid adding another hook. Like we just went through all this effort to simplify the hooks. So if I can keep this to within load, that would be my preference. I feel like if it's within load, it inherently diverges from browsers in that like we could have within a single load hook or function, like fs.read file to get the contents from disk, then or before, either way, then validate the assertions. Oh, the assertions failed, throw an exception. Then later on, the same the same URL is getting loaded again because now it is a different assertion. And then the same, like the fs read file will happen a second time, which is like something that browsers never do.
So what if we add another property to the return of the load hook
A
that says
load?
like asserted true, and asserted true tells Node like, shush, don't worry about it, it's fine.
I mean, that's not going to work once you have multiple kinds of assertions. You can't have a flag that's just Boolean. So if somebody has type and then version and then,
Well,
language
it
or
could
whatever.
basically be
Version.
like either all the assertions passed or at least one of them failed. That's what it would be.
Yeah, and then the loader inside of load is responsible for verifying all of those various things. And if it fails to do so, then it effed up.
At least for type, that's not allowed by JavaScript spec.
It's specifically like to
Type
say,
is
like,
specifically
this is cool.
banned from saying it's cool.
Ah, damn. Okay.
There was
Never mind.
Banned, what do you mean?
strong feelings from Firefox about it must be banned from being interpreted any other way. And it is a JSON module, which they went and they are making their own data type just specifically so it can't be worked around.
Did they have a suggestion on how to handle the situation?
I mean,
I'm not saying like people should be doing this left and right, but like
in general,
sure.
It was just whatever your load operation does needs to have its full cache key, and then you do some kind of operation to reduce the cache keys. So the cache keys are the URL, the absolute full URL, and then key pairs of assertion key and assertion value tuples. So you have an arbitrarily large cache key. And then you have to use your loaders or whatever means you do. And for any given one of those pairs of the assertion key and assertion value, you have to determine if it collides with another part of the cache or not. So the cache isn't a tree, it's a graph, which might confuse people. Because we're storing it in maps, but the map can actually point, to siblings,
right,
rather than deeper.
And sorry, what is the actual, like the functional problem?
The functional problem is easily explained with the assert and non-assert form for type JSON. So we have a cache key. If we have a load operation, we basically have tied it to URL being the cache key. And that is assigned prior to load, effectively. But assertions and stuff aren't always available prior to load. They have to be generated from load because some are coming in from network or wherever, I don't care. And then, so these refine the previous cache key, which is okay, but there's no way to coalesce, which is what Antoine, Gus want, and Jordan want, is the ability to have two siblings. So in both load operations, they return different refinements on the cache key.
Wait, so is this like saying you have two keys that point to the same value?
Yes, that is absolutely what the spec says. Keys are not unique.
You mean values are not unique? Because in this case, if you have multiple keys pointing to the same value, then okay.
No, values would be, there would be only one.
There can be one value for multiple keys, and there can be multiple values for multiple keys. There's never multiple values for one key.
Right.
That's the only guarantee that the spec makes.
Okay.
But these are not primary keys if we're talking database terms.
Right. Well.
So
All right, well, I need to go,
basically,
I need to go in a few minutes, but I guess Bradley, if you
all you need
have
to
a
do,
suggestion for how to implement this that's different than the path I was going down, if you feel like writing it out,
I mean,
either on Slack or
it
somewhere else.
doesn't matter how we do it. I will be at my new job next week, and then I'll have more time after that cools off. But basically, you can store the refinements on the module job itself or in the cache key. Doesn't really matter. You're just moving where the data pointer is, but you have to take all those key value pairs and put them somewhere.
Okay, so then so then there is promise in the thing that I was proposing be my next step of like just storing the whole assertions object as something additional on the module job object.
Sure,
And
that should be
then
fine.
when you look up the module job by the URL, just compare the two objects, like the one that we're trying to match assertions object, is it, you know,
Is it there?
assert.strict equal or however you want to compare them to the one that's in the cache.
Yep. That seems
I guess
fine.
then the question is like, if they're not, I mean, if they are a match, then you're done. You just return it. But if they're not a match, then what? Like,
I mean, then they must cause a call site error. So where dynamic import would reject or static import would fail to load.
Oh, then great.
as long as assertions are not optional, I kind of don't need to worry about it because I know one or the other is gonna throw
Yes,
by the time they
there's
both
no
resolve.
collision.
It's only when assertions are optional that this all falls apart, which is why I'm increasingly feeling like we can never have optional assertions.
It's not about optional or not. It's about any kind of collision. So if you have type WASM and type JSON, it is also bad.
Right.
Well, one of them is going to throw, is my point.
But
yes, but you get into the cache problem again.
no, I
So,
think what
like this is
I think what Jeffrey is talking about is you have two imports of the same thing. One of them has the assertion and one of them doesn't. And both are actually looking for the same thing. They should both be okay, right?
I mean, they're the same problem as having it optional or not.
I mean, I guess
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's
question is
what I mean.
like, say you get to the, say you're going down that path that I was describing where like this, say that example that I pasted in the chat where the first one is in there, it's gonna eventually throw, but it hasn't thrown yet. When by the time the second one looks for the same fixtures / empty.js in the cache. So the second one proceeds through the full life cycle. Like it doesn't get short circuited by saying, oh, there's one in the cache, return it and stop. It pretends like it never found something in the cache. And so then it's going to go through the whole life cycle. It could finish its whole life cycle, but still while the first one is not yet thrown. So then what? Does it like overwrite in the cache?
So that's what I was talking about. We need to expose those operations for refinement, determining how to deal with collision. In all these cases, that's an eventual thing.
Yeah, that's what I don't know.
That's not something we
quite know
don't
what to do about.
For now, I would just always do a coalesce operation and tell loaders if they don't want to coalesce, never return different data
What
points
would it
on
mean
that
to coalesce
module.
in this scenario where
So
like
coalesce
following the
just
second one there, how would that coalesce with the first one that's already in the module cache?
no. So we don't have a good way to do that right now, unfortunately. Basically, you would have to change the return type of load so that it can just return a refinement. So basically, if you load one, it's got the assertion on it, or it doesn't have the assertion on it. It does return JSON, so it's going to fail normally. So it fails after its load hook. The second one gets the resolve, and it needs to tell essentially the assertions that it's going to apply, which are the refinements to the cache key and how it behaves. We don't have time for this. I can try to write it out better.
Yeah, please try to write it out, because I didn't get this far in my thinking through the thing, so I'm not sure what to do at this this corner of the
Juncture.
corner cases. So
Basically, you just want a load hook that doesn't return a new body. It just points to another record.
Can it do that?
I mean,
Like,
we're
as it
allowed to
is,
do
I think
whatever we
it-
want.
No, no, no. I mean, like currently,
let's not
it doesn't
even
have
worry about
access to that
user loaders
information.
for a second. Like, just figure out how to get this to work within Node, and then we can, I feel like once we get something working that handles all the edge cases in Node, then hopefully it'll become clear how to handle this within user loaders, like what input and outputs the load hook should have and all that.
I mean, there are different ideas I have on it, but
Well,
I've got
look to
a
you
job to finish
for
up.
enlightenment, Bradley.
Don't yeah, but it could be an opportunity for us to fix up the built-in format to be something more generic and universal that makes more sense, because that's basically an advanced cache operation too. So we'll discuss it later. I'm not gonna really have time to work on this for a month, so I'm sorry.
Well, I think, in fairness to Antoine, I want to try to get this PR done as soon as I can. I was hoping to get it done before this
I think
meeting. I feel
either
like I'm
way
really
you
close.
do it is fine, because we'll get implementation feedback and I don't see a problem in either direction. Both have pros and cons.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's also, this feels like we don't have to unflag. Well, we're not going to unflag JSON modules for at least a month, I think, even after this PR lands. So there could be plenty of time to refine this, like what to do with on conflict behavior. Like, I don't feel like that needs to be resolved in order to land this PR. As long as there's something, as long as it does something in the PR, what it does, I feel like we could revise and follow up.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Cool.
Okay, so I just need to figure out what that something is so that I can land the PR. So if you have an idea on that, I feel like I'm gonna come up with something that may not be the best. I feel like I'm gonna come up with something that's like has an obvious design flaw, like, oh, whatever the newer one is replaces the older one in the cache. And sure, there's probably something terrible that happens as a result of that, but deal with that later or something. So, if you have a better idea for
Just say we'll deal with it later.
I come up with, then by all means, let me know.
Just ship it. Loaders are still experimental. I mean, they're probably going to be experimental past JSON.
I know, but JSON modules are on the verge of being released. So like, I want to at least get, like, we need to solve this problem for how to handle the edge cases of assertions in order to unflag JSON modules, which a lot of people do want. Right?
I don't think we're going to
wanna
solve
wait
it for
that.
user land loaders in time.
Huh?
We're not going to solve it for user land loaders in time.
It doesn't have to be like.
So yeah, just don't worry.
Like, user land loaders, fuck them. They can introduce JSON, whatever. Like, we can deal with those consequences later. But yeah. By the way, one last thing before we go, Derek pointed out recently that apparently there's an alias in the Node CLI flags where -- loader is an alias for -- experimental loader. Were either of you aware of this, or?
It's been that way for a long time.
Is it supposed to be
Why?
that way? I thought people
That
were
makes
just
it
doing
sound
it like,
loaders are unflagged.
yeah, I thought people were just doing
You
it
still
like
get the warning and
presumptively.
everything. It was because they are considered a runtime warning. So, and then enough people were using it that we can't really throw them under the bus with -- experimental. If you want to throw them under the bus, do it with a big change. Don't just do it randomly.
Patch.
I mean, it feels like removing it at this point would be a major change. So I feel like we're kind of stuck with it unless unless people want to argue that it was an accident or something, but like,
I think I did it on purpose in
you did it on purpose?
2019, I think. That was a while ago. Yeah.
Okay, so it was just done as a convenience for users and
Yes.
but
because you still got
that
the
it might
warning on the
confuse people that
CLI.
this wasn't experimental, but you thought it was okay because it still prints the experimental warning.
I mean, at the time, a bunch of flags didn't have hyphen experimental in front of them. They would just give you warnings.
Oh,
That's changed.
all right. So in other words, we want to just leave this alone.
Yes. I don't want to rock the boat.
I mean, if it's been this way for 2 years, then I feel like, yeah, we would be breaking people for no good reason if it's eventually going to become -- loader again. So then, but okay. Good. I was just curious the backstory. All right, I'm over. Was there anything else either of you wanted to?
I can hit you up on Slack. Just curious.
I saw your
on
PR.
What
I've
I'm supposed to be
started
doing.
reviewing it. I need to finish it. The gist of it's fine. I'm just finding like typos and stuff, but it looks pretty good.
Oh, in the loaders for the design doc stuff.
Yeah. Sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I was going to ask. I saw a whole bunch of people asking me to like backport things and like do some other stuff. Is this something I need to do? They were asking me while I was on vacation, and I was
Bradley,
like,
you know better than me. I think it's more it's up to you. If it's up to you, like, do you want this PR, this loaders redesign to exist on the 14.x and 12.x lines of Node? If you do, then you need to do the backport PR. The other thing is that like the window will close for landing backports on 12. I don't know when. You can look up the Node release calendar. I think when we ship Node 18, which is in like March or something, then they close the door on 17, and they also close the door on 12. I think 12 at that point is like end of life or maintenance release or something. So so it's like, if you want it, do it sooner than later.
okay. And does it have does it block releasing it in 16?
No.
I mean, we don't ever have to go back if we don't want to. I think it's more like there are a lot of people out in the wild still on 14 because it's the LTS branch right now, and then 16 becomes the LTS branch in like March or something. So if you want more people to be using this feature sooner, then backport it at least to 14 so that the people who aren't going any newer than LTS will start being able to use it.
Okay,
or
cool.
even some people not on 14.
Ideally, yeah.
For various reasons, because like their dependencies don't support 14 but do support 12 and whatnot. And so backporting it to 12 is a way of catching even more users to test out your stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, ideally, all the things. I have no idea what the level of
I think it's a question of like how many other PRs yours depends on that haven't been backported. So like backporting this, there haven't been that many PRs on loaders. Like I think yours was the first one in over a year. So it might very well be that you could just follow those instructions that Targos put, and your PR should land pretty cleanly. Maybe you have to resolve some conflicts in some docs, markdown files or something, but like hopefully there's not huge conflicts, which implies that there is some other dependency, some other big PR that should have been backported before this one.
Cool.
You could just you could just start following the instructions and see how many conflicts you get. And if there aren't that many, then just go for it. If it looks intimidating, then say F it, but
okay,
up to you. The conflicts should give you a hint of like what the other PR might have been that had to go first. And hopefully if there's only one, then maybe you just do two separate PRs for the two backports, and then you're done. But it's really up to you in terms of how much effort you want to put into it and how valuable it is that people on Node 14 be, running this API. I mean, I
Okay,
think like
cool.
if we can backport it, we might as well always, because then like it makes it easier for loader authors that need to support all non-end of life versions of Node. If all actively maintained versions of Node have the same API for loaders, and that will make it a lot easier for Datadog and New Relic and those folks, because they only need to ship one version of their loader.
Oh yeah, sure. Like if it's just like cherry pick some stuff, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll take a look
Bradley,
at
did I
that.
explain that correctly, or is there anything I'm wrong about?
That
You
seems
know much
fine.
better than me.
That seems about right. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure because I saw that Danielle added like a do not release or something to some pull requests, and I was like, wait, why? After they
I
had
think
already
because
merged.
it has conflicts. Like they
Oh.
tried to do the steps that Targos did, but they were merge conflicts, and they don't know how to, someone who didn't work on this code doesn't know how to resolve the conflicts. That's like really you, maybe me,
Yeah.
but most likely just you will know what to do about the conflicts they find.
Okay.
So that's why she was like, this is where I stopped. Someone who worked on this PR needs to be responsible for backporting it. That's what they mean by it doesn't backport cleanly, as in it has conflicts when they try to merge that branch onto the 14.x branch.
Okay, cool. I think Targos resolved that though, because it was missing something, and it's okay now.
Maybe, I don't remember what the result is, but yeah, I think
I'll
that's what
look.
that means. But you should be able to handle it. It's just
Okay.
that whoever was on the release team didn't know how to handle it because they weren't familiar with the code.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. And Bradley, is it like one PR per backport? So he would open a separate PR for 14 and then another PR for 12?
Usually. Yeah.
Okay. And then I would just land them, I think, right?
Yeah. After they pass the CI and everything, there's a longer CI on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, if you want to open them, I can land them.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. We'll see you guys, I guess, in 2 weeks.
Do we?